Venezuela is sitting on some of the largest oil reserves on earth, and yet today its survival hangs on a single question: who controls that oil and who it belongs to next? In Washington, the Trump administration has made its position unmistakably clear. Oil is no longer just energy, it is leverage. To resume production, Venezuela is being asked to make a choice that will redefine its future. Cut ties with China, with Russia, with Iran, with Cuba, and align its energy destiny exclusively with the United States. This is not diplomacy as persuasion. This is diplomacy as pressure. Off Venezuela's coast, a massive military buildup sends a silent message. Time is measured in weeks. If you want to understand how power works in the modern world, stay with me. Because what's unfolding here is not just about Venezuela. It's about how nations are bent, not broken, in the 21st century. I want to slow this down for a moment, because beneath the headlines, there is a very precise structure at work. The United States is not simply negotiating with Venezuela. It is redefining the terms of sovereignty. The message delivered by Washington is stark. Oil production can resume, but only under new rules. Rules where future sales favor the Trump administration. Rules where U.S. oil companies come first. Rules where revenue is no longer controlled by Caracas, but overseen from Washington. At the center of this moment stands Venezuela's interim leadership, facing a narrowing set of options. The country's economy, already fragile, depends almost entirely on oil exports. And without them, survival is measured in weeks, not years. This is why oil becomes more than a commodity. It becomes a gatekeeper to stabilization, to recovery, to any possible transition. But here is the deeper question you should be asking. What happens when economic survival is conditional on geopolitical loyalty? To answer that, we need to look backward at how Venezuela arrived at this point. To understand this moment, we have to step back not years, but cycles. Venezuela's modern economy was built on a single dangerous assumption: that oil would always be enough. For decades, oil revenues masked structural weakness. They funded the state. They stabilized politics. They postponed reform. But over time, dependence turned into vulnerability. When oil prices fell, when production collapsed, when sanctions tightened, the entire system lost its shock absorbers. What you are seeing now is the end of that cycle. An economy reduced to one lifeline becomes easy to pressure. A state that cannot monetize its resources independently loses strategic autonomy. And when foreign partners step in, China, Russia, Iran, Cuba, they do not come as charities. They come as stakeholders. That is the context Washington is exploiting. By targeting oil, the United States is not just reviving production. It is resetting the balance of external influence around Venezuela's core asset. This is not about the past. It is about who controls the next cycle. And that control is about to be tested suddenly, publicly, and explosively. Everything changed the moment pressure turned into action. Over the weekend, Venezuela's sitting president was removed. And almost immediately, the focus shifted not to speeches, not to ceremonies, but to oil. Washington moved fast. A deal was announced to sell tens of millions of barrels already extracted, between 30 and 50 million barrels, high-quality oil, market price, and critically, the money would not go to the regime. It would be controlled by the United States. That single decision tells you everything about the balance of power. This was not relief. It was containment. Secretary of State Marco Rubio made it explicit. The revenue would be dispersed in ways that benefit the Venezuelan people. Not corruption, not the old system, but the mechanism matters. Control first, distribution later. At the same time, offshore, a massive military buildup removed any remaining ambiguity. This was not a suggestion. It was a deadline. If you're trying to understand modern geopolitics, pause here, because this is where economic policy, military pressure, and moral language converge. And once they do, there is no easy way back. What comes next is less visible, but far more consequential. What's happening now is not chaos, it is choreography. Beneath the public demands lies a very deliberate mechanism, one that the United States has refined over decades. First, identify the pressure point. In Venezuela's case, it is oil, the only asset capable of generating immediate cash. Second, isolate alternatives. China, Russia, Iran, Cuba, not because of ideology, but because they provide Caracas with options. And power is nothing more than the removal of options. Third, centralize control. Oil can be sold, but the revenue flows are supervised. Sanctions can be reviewed, but only after compliance. Stabilization comes before recovery. Recovery before transition. This is conditional reintegration into the global system. Notice what is absent. There is no immediate talk of elections, no sweeping promises of sovereignty restored. Those come later, if at all. The priority is strategic alignment. Energy flows toward the United States. Foreign adversaries are pushed out of the Western Hemisphere. And Venezuela becomes less a partner than a managed node in a larger geopolitical design. This is not regime change as spectacle. It is regime change as systems engineering. And systems, once redesigned, are very hard to reverse, which is why the next rupture matters more than the first. Pressure, when sustained, always produces a second breaking point. This one arrived quietly in briefings, in closed rooms, in warnings delivered without cameras. US officials told lawmakers that the priority was no longer symbolic reform, it was enforcement. Foreign actors had to leave. Immediately, counter-narcotics cooperation had to begin. Immediately. Oil could move, but only in approved directions. Behind the scenes, the message to Caracas was simple. Delay is defiance. And defiance carries a cost. The administration made clear that sanctions relief was possible but conditional. Not on promises, on proof. This is where pressure becomes internal. Every delay fractures elites. Every concession reshuffles loyalties. The question inside Venezuela is no longer whether to comply, but who survives compliance. Because when a state is forced to choose between sovereignty and solvency, someone always pays first. And it is rarely the people making the decisions. That is where this story turns human. Because the next consequences are not measured in barrels or sanctions. They are measured in lives, including yours. If you were standing there, if you live inside this system, none of this feels strategic. It feels personal. For you, oil is not a geopolitical lever. It is food prices. It is electricity that works or doesn't. It is whether your job survives another month. When Washington says Venezuela has weeks, not months, this is what that means. Hospitals waiting on supplies, families watching currencies lose meaning, young people calculating how far they can go and whether to leave at all. You did not choose China or Russia or Iran. You did not design sanctions or alliances. But you live with the consequences of all of them. And here is the quiet cruelty of leverage politics. Pressure is applied at the top, but absorbed at the bottom. The promise is stabilization. The hope is recovery. The word transition hangs in the air like a distant horizon. If you are listening to this and wondering whether power can ever be exercised without pain, you are asking the right question. Stay with me. Because what happens next does not stop at Venezuela's borders. If this analysis helps you see the world more clearly, take a moment to share it. Understanding is its own form of power. What is unfolding in Venezuela is not a local drama. It is a signal. For China, this is a warning shot across the Western Hemisphere. Energy partnerships that once looked permanent are now exposed as vulnerable. Influence built on loans, infrastructure, and long-term bets can be undone quickly when leverage shifts. For Russia and Iran, the message is even sharper. Geography matters again. Proximity to the United States is no longer neutral ground. It is contested space. And for smaller nations watching from the sidelines, the lesson is unsettling. Alignment is not just about ideology. It is about who can keep your economy breathing when pressure arrives. This is how great power competition is changing. Not through invasion, not through ideology, but through choke points, energy, finance, logistics. Venezuela's oil becomes more than a resource. It becomes precedent. If foreign adversaries can be pushed out here, they can be pressured elsewhere, quietly, incrementally, system by system. This is the new map of power, less visible than before, but far more effective. And once this logic is established, the future stops being linear. It branches. Now we arrive at the question that matters most. What happens next? There are three possible futures and none of them are clean. In the best case, Venezuela stabilizes. Oil flows resume. Revenue, tightly managed, slows the economic freefall. Foreign adversaries leave. Sanctions ease gradually. The country regains a measure of predictability, not sovereignty, but survival. This is recovery without dignity, but recovery nonetheless. The middle path is more fragile. Compliance is partial. Elites resist. Oil flows, but politics remain frozen. The economy improves just enough to avoid collapse, but not enough to heal. Venezuela becomes a permanently managed state, suspended between pressure and dependence. The worst case is rupture. Resistance hardens. Deadlines are missed. Pressure escalates. Sanctions tighten. The economy snaps, and oil, the very asset meant to save the country, becomes the catalyst for deeper instability. Here is the uncomfortable truth. None of these futures are chosen freely. They are shaped by systems larger than any single leader. And once those systems lock in, choice becomes an illusion. Which brings us to the final question, not about Venezuela, but about us. This is how the modern world is being reordered quietly, transaction by transaction. Venezuela's oil is not just fuel. It is a test case, a demonstration of how power now works when military invasion is too costly and diplomacy too slow. The United States is not asking for allegiance. It is pricing it. China, Russia, Iran, they are not being confronted head on. They are being edged out, one choke point at a time. And Venezuela sits at the center of that experiment. If you take one insight from this story, let it be this. In the 21st century, sovereignty is no longer lost in a single moment. It is negotiated away barrel by barrel, condition by condition. For you, watching from afar, this may feel distant. But the logic applied here will travel to other resources, to other regions, to other crises. Understanding this is not cynicism. It is clarity. If you want to keep seeing the world not as headlines, but as systems follow this series, share it and stay with me. Because the next chapter of global power is already being written.